it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our funding panel, none other than Phil Weilerstein, who is a honorary member of the National Academy of Inventors and also the Chief Executive Officer of VentureWell. Phil?
Well, good morning. How are we doing today? So I'll warn you in advance, this is going to be a highly optimistic panel based on a premise, which I believe is true, yes, that there has never been a better time to be an inventor, particularly to be an academic inventor. I've got a fantastic panel here with me this morning to share their perspectives on this and bring this forward in a really multi-dimensional way. So let me introduce them, or let me let them introduce themselves to you. Steve Susalka, who is the CEO of AUTM.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Steve Susalka. As Phil mentioned, I'm the CEO of AUTM. AUTM is a nonprofit association focused on supporting and advancing technology transfer worldwide. So we have a couple of core beliefs in our association. So our association is composed of members that come from each of your tech transfer offices. So we've got about 3,000 members from every single research-intensive institution across the United States and 65 countries as well. So I mentioned we had a couple of core beliefs. And so one of our first ones that I think I share with everybody in this room is innovation is changing the world for the better. So we believe that. That's one. Number two, we believe that tech transfer is about impact, not income. I'm sure this is something that's come up on your campuses alone as well. So impact, not income is another one. And then the third really important one is innovation happens everywhere. Doesn't just happen on the coasts, doesn't just happen at R1 institutions, it happens everywhere. The challenge, and what we're going to talk about a little later today, is it only is commercialized or advanced where resources exist. And as Phil mentioned, this is the best time to be an inventor. So looking forward to continuing the conversation.
And Marc Gibson, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Director of the Division of Partnership and Economic Development at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville.
Thanks, Phil. Good morning, everyone. Really pleasure to be here speaking with you this morning just to talk about what we've got going on at the University of Tennessee and the opportunities to engage with investors, entrepreneurs, founders, the entire ecosystem here in Raleigh. So thank you. So Phil, at the University of Tennessee, one of the things that we do, we really try to take a 360-degree approach to the ways that we engage our ecosystem. We kind of look at the mantra, making life and lives better across the state of Tennessee and looking at the future land-grant institution. So what does the modern and the future land-grant institution look like, and how do we help to achieve that mission, right? So things that we look at in our ecosystem, everything from the upstream to the downstream. My office really more focuses on the upstream side of that, the technology development piece of that, and how we inspire our great founders and inventors to start their own companies, to go through the process, and then move all the way through the process to the downstream, which is looking at how they write a business plan and those types of things. So we also look at the approach at the university, and this is, I think, something that I would certainly encourage everyone, is no one on a campus owns the term entrepreneurship. No one owns it, right? It is a full, holistic approach that everyone really has to engage in and take ownership of. And that's the way we look at it as well. So how do we create a door, how do we create pathways for our inventors to be successful from upstream all the way to downstream? So
thank you. And Dr. Sylvia Thomas, who is the Vice President for Research and Innovation and also leads the University of Southern Florida Research Foundation and is a professor of engineering as well.
Yes, thank you, Phil, and good morning, good afternoon, early afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. At the University of South Florida, we pride ourselves on investing in people, process, and partnerships. And as we look at being a member of AAU, a newly founded member of AAU over this past year, we've reflected on some of the things that we've invested in around innovation. So like many of you, coming into the Vice President for Research and Innovation office, I reflected on my time as a faculty and thought about what needed to be part of the process in terms of incentivizing faculty, incentivizing leadership and staff to actually play a role in how we can continue to grow our innovation ecosystem. So in looking at our totality at the University of South Florida, we too look at those pathways and we talk about the culture of innovation, and we also instill resources for faculty across the university that allow them to be successful in those paths. And so we also began to partner with our community organizations in order to bring a greater understanding of that translation of research into product and how that product actually can make a difference to our community. And we began to instill that mindset and that culture into our faculty, students, and staff. And we began to talk about that message. President Law has challenged us in the course of the last week or so to go out and to be bold and to talk about innovation in a way where it makes a difference to an everyday individual. And as we talk about all of the sources that we have as universities, and we talk about why we're doing this business, one of the things that is paramount is, in fact, the impact that we're going to have. And so at the University of South Florida, that's one of our key initiatives, talking about that economic impact. Why we're one of the top 25 universities in producing patents. But even taking that a step further, as you've heard in many of the panels, how we commercialize that and make a difference in terms of the quality of life of society.
Thank you. And Wade Fulghum, who is, as you know, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research Commercialization at North Carolina State University.
And yeah, good morning. You heard my story. I would say that so we're a large tech transfer office. We're over 20 people. We have a creative services team, a new ventures team. We run the Wolfpack Investor Network. I would say that one of the things that we've done that I think has really helped our university transition is setting expectations. And you saw the graph that I put up where we like to keep our researchers focused on their highest and best use, which is research in the lab. And we'd like them to go around that track multiple times. But it's important to set the expectation to faculty that we're here as a partner to basically help you in every way that we can. So that's NC State.
Right. So as I said at the opening, we're going to be relentlessly optimistic here. And you know, the reason for that is that, in my belief, and I think our panelists agree with this, in some ways, life has never been better. We have greater longevity than we had. We've made huge progress, although there's much left to do in addressing some of the most dire needs that exist in the world around poverty. But the opportunity to invent, and I think some of the joy of inventing comes from solving real problems and making an impact and a difference. And certainly this opportunity emerges from the needs, the pressures that society has, whether it's the changes wrought by climate transformations or the emerging pandemics that we went through. Necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that, you know, as you think about how you as an inventor or you as a person who enables and inspires inventors can make them able to better bring that capacity forward in themselves and to create, as we just heard a great example in North Carolina, create that capacity within the institution that you're part of. Some of the other things that are making a difference here, which are not just about resources, although we're going to focus a lot about resources, I want to emphasize that it's also a great time to collaborate. Communication, collaboration, the sharing of information has never been as friction-free as it is. And while that has some hazards and some challenges with respect to securing, say, your intellectual property and maintaining the rights to the domain that you've identified, it also enables new forms of collaboration and access to data that can drive things at a speed that really was never possible. And importantly, and I think you'll see this in the way that the resources that we're going to talk about have emerged, all of these pressures and needs and the opportunity spaces have sharpened the focus of our policymakers and resulted in an outpouring of resources targeted to technological innovation as both a solution to society's needs and as a path forward for our continued prosperity. So that's sort of setting the table around the broader society world and why it's so great. I think the other is around the university. We're going to dig into this a little bit more, but the culture of universities is changing. I've been doing this work at VentureWell for almost 30 years, and it has dramatically transformed from, sort of a, why would I be interested in translation of my ideas? I'm a faculty member, to where's the lab? Before I take this job, I want to know that there are resources here and available for us. So there are big changes that have taken place culturally, and in some ways those have been kind of reified and implemented in ways that have turned tech transfer from what it started off as being kind of a filter and an enforcer to now being a pump and an enabler. And finally, we are starting to get a lot more interest and understanding at a local level of why it's important to support innovation at your partner university. And I think that's actually one of the ways that the connection between the university and its community really can be enabled, and innovation as essentially sort of placing a welcome mat for further engagement, both in an intellectual way and in creating opportunities for people. So I'm going to turn first to Steve to give us a little bit of context and background for this, in particular around the tech transfer function and activities.
Great, thanks. And so I want to build off what Phil said, but I actually want to do that by starting about 40 years ago, right? So just to kind of see how this has evolved. Wade, you told a great story about how evolution on NC State's campus has evolved over the years. So remember, tech transfer didn't really exist at any large level until the 1980s, right, with the Bayh-Dole Act. And there was very limited tech transfer capacity. In fact, Autumn counts about a dozen tech transfer offices that existed prior to 1980. So just recognize, that's where we started. 1980s, 1990s, after the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act, is probably when each of your tech transfer offices were started. And when they were started, there was no profession, right? That was brand new. In fact, and you were talking about going from a enforcer, a filter enforcer, to now where we are with a pump. I've got a great example of that, and that was, there's one university that part of one of the reasons with the Bayh-Dole Act, to retain rights to your inventions, you need to have a tech transfer office. So there was the creation of these tech transfer offices again in the 80s and the 90s. One of them, they were looking for, well, who's going to lead the tech transfer office? And they ended up appointing the head of parking services to the tech transfer office. And this is no knock on the university. This is just where we were in the 80s and 90s. But you get back to this, what was tech transfer in the 80s and 90s? It was a lot of Bayh-Dole reporting. Make sure you're compliant. Make sure you report your inventions. Make sure you report them properly, and let us know. That's what it was. Now, over the years, again, as all of our professions have enhanced and gotten better, we've now actually embraced innovation on your campuses in a way that's never happened before, right? So now you've got talented tech transfer professionals across the country that are not there just to make sure you disclose your invention. They're there to help you develop that invention further, to help expand the coverage of your invention, and identify those partners to go forward. One of the other things that's really interesting in, we're talking maybe a 10, 20-year look back. There used to be, tech transfer would basically focus on the evaluation of the invention, the protection of the invention, patents, copyrights, and then the licensing of that invention. That was kind of the 3 steps of tech transfer. Tech transfer has now expanded even further. You've got industry engagement on the front end. You've got more and more startup companies being developed. Many of you might be CSOs or CEOs of your own startups that arose out of your research that were shepherded by those tech transfer offices. So that's pretty interesting from a tech transfer standpoint. And again, just as sort of an analogy, tech transfer offices, often an office in the basement of some building, right? And little by little, you saw them coming up and being in larger buildings, better staffed, better resourced. Now, how many of your institutions now actually have innovation within their vision statement? It's now become dispersed across the entire ecosystem. The Tech Transfer Office is responsible for education, responsible for commercialization of those inventions, creation of startups. That's all expanding to a level that it never existed before. And so what does that look like today? So again, this is sort of taking you on a whirlwind 40-year voyage. So what does that look like now? So in the US, and Autumn's been collecting data since 1991, we see about 25,000 inventions every single year. 25,000 inventions in the US alone. 25,000 inventions. The tech transfer professionals, along with the inventors, are developing those. We see about 10,000 deals every year. 10,000 deals. Each of those deals, that could be the next cure for prostate cancer. That could be the next diagnostic for breast cancer, next photovoltaic. 10,000 of those every year. And not to mention just those two, there are about 1,000 startups that are started in the United States from nonprofit universities each year. 1,000 startups. I mean, think about that. The impact of that is unbelievable. And we've come from a stage of, well, it's a brand new profession, we're trying to ease into it, now to a point where the university is appreciating tech transfer and innovation in a way that maybe it didn't recognize before, to now you have all of these opportunities that have never existed before. So great time, and I just want to echo what Phil said. This is a great time to be an inventor and a great time to have those innovations advance to the products and services of tomorrow.
So Marc, one of the big changes that's taken place has been the recognition and support for early stage innovation-focused training and education, and often coupled with resources. Can you give us a grounding in how opportunities like I-Corps have changed the path that an inventor takes towards translation, and actually the role of the inventor as the driver and pilot of that innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. Stephen, I'm going to add a little bit to what you said as well, because one thing that we actually looked at, if you look at universities, you said 40 years ago. I think if you even just go back 10 to 15 years, it's very different, right? And that's the way it is in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee. We have really embarked on a very, I think, ambitious initiative to look at the university and provide all of our students, and we're close to 38,000 students now, provide all of our students the resources and the tools to leave the university when they graduate with a startup. Now I want you to think about that for just a second, right? That's really ambitious, right? That's not going to happen overnight. And the way that we look at that is you've got a class that comes in as a freshman and they've got 4 to 5 years. So you've got the opportunity to change the culture at your institutions somewhere between 5 and 8 years as a class will cycle in and cycle out, right? Is that realistic to think that everyone is going to leave with a startup? Probably not, right? But if you provide them the resources, the tools to be successful, and you create this story, and you give them the confidence that they can do that, then you can actually change a culture. And so those are the things that we're trying to do on our campus. That's for the undergraduate level, right? And then hoping to give them the resources to move on and move through the pathways that we talked about earlier. But Phil, kind of building on what the question is there too. I can't state the importance enough of customer discovery, right? When we talk about I-Core, and I appreciate you mentioning I-Core, I think that is such an important part of the roadmap that our inventors take. And if we're not providing them those resources at the very early stages, it can be really, really difficult. We always talk about the valley of death, and Stephen, I think it was you on one of our calls that mentioned it's not just the valley anymore, it's the divots along the way, and how can you help to fill those divots? I think that's so important, and I love that. I've used that, I've stolen that from you, and I'm using it quite a bit now. But I do think that's really important. Sometimes the divot is at the very tip of the process, right, the very beginning, right? And we think about how we inspire our inventors to think about starting a startup or thinking about translating their technologies into a viable product, right? That can't happen unless they're out and talking with customers, unless they're out in the marketplace, learning what the market is and what the market can bear. So I-Core is so important. We also, and Stephen, I think you said this too, it's not just about funding, so it's not, but we do need to think about how we can help to seed those investors very early stage, very, very early stage. Wade, I think you, at NC State, you have a Chancellor's Innovation Fund. We've got something similar at the University of Tennessee. How do you de-risk those opportunities for early stage opportunities for our inventors who don't really know what a startup is, don't really know that they want to get that technology out of the office, but they kind of want to stick their toe in a little bit, right? So provide them those fundings to de-risk that. I think that's really, really important. Certainly funding opportunities. I also want to say too, I think this is really important, Phil. You have to think about the next generation of inventors that are coming in. This next generation of inventors is so exciting. Like we look at this at the University of Tennessee when they come in and they are ready to go. How do you, and I'm going to say this several times throughout our discussion today, but how do you mentor them? How do you take our seasoned inventors on our campus and make sure that you're aligning them with our new faculty and our junior faculty who are coming in, who are so excited about doing new technologies, creating new technologies, getting them into the marketplace. So how do you link those? So that's something that we're really looking at the university too.
That's great. And as I brought up at the beginning, collaboration and enabling people to connect with each other is really kind of one of the fonts of inspiration that drives and enables particularly emerging inventors to take flight. Sylvia, you're the leader of a really active, vibrant intellectual property ecosystem or intellectual property driven ecosystem. Can you describe what a healthy ecosystem for inventorship looks like and how you're building that at USF?
Absolutely, Phil. And, chiming in and building everything that Phil and Marc have talked about and Wade in his earlier presentation. And again, even the concepts that you've heard in the other panels, when we talk about that healthy ecosystem, it has to start, of course, at the top. So we've had great leadership. Paul Sandberg, right, in terms of his leadership at the University of South Florida and starting the National Academy of Inventors. But starting in terms of looking bottom up, top down, we have to begin with establishing an infrastructure. And that healthy ecosystem begins with that infrastructure. So you may ask yourself, well, how? So when we talk about our alignment across our research enterprise or our research ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem, bridging that gap is really important. So our innovators and our faculty, our students, again, our staff, have to have a mindset of creativity, a mindset of being an innovator. And so being able to distill that across the university is really important. And few of the things that we do is through our tech transfer office, we have tech scouts that go into the classroom. They go to our research symposiums and they talk with the students, they talk with the faculty that are presenting the research and encourage them to think outside of the box and to think about the research that they're doing and how it can be translated into that innovation, into that product. We, as was mentioned in the panel yesterday by Subra, we have a disclosure portal where all students, faculty, and staff can actually disclose their inventions in the portal. In addition to that, we began to look at how we can bridge with consultants. So the consultants can help us in terms of that commercialization and that system. Through our research park, we invite our students through our student incubator, our Tampa Bay Technology Incubator. We invite companies to our research park to engage, and it's adjacent to our campus where our students can intern at those startup companies. They walk right across the street to their place of employment in terms of engagement and how those startups are beginning to build those products, build those proof of concepts in terms of translating that into economic impact. Of our 72 startups in our research park, they too have a $6 billion economic impact and the things that they're doing across not only our region and the state, but globally. And moving on to some of the other opportunities that we avail to our faculty and staff, our FNAI chapter they have sessions, they invite speakers in to talk about real life experiences and how they have, again, translated their research into product, had their startups that began. When we talk about our students, what are we doing in our student incubator? We're actually encouraging those students to begin research first, right? And actually to be creative about the discovery of research and how that research can translate into innovation. Through the high-tech quarter, we're able to fund every college in terms of fundamental undergraduate research, which is really important to get those students connected with our faculty. Across other spaces, we began to continue to build that healthy ecosystem across other partnerships, such as the small business development, which is part of our research park as well. In addition to that, we began to find other opportunities for our startup companies and our faculty through community organizations, such as your chambers, such as the consortiums that are part of your ecosystem. So all of these things we're doing to align with what that means to grow a healthy innovation ecosystem. And there are other resources that we provide in terms of early stage innovation funds. So all of these resources are common in terms of successful innovation ecosystems. So begin to think about and tap into some of the resources that we'll be talking about here today. Begin to implement some of these successful examples across your innovation systems. But even more so, as you're going into your cabinet meetings, as you're going into the classroom to talk with students, as you're going into your lab, begin to think in terms of that mindset of an innovator and how your students can also contribute to that innovation.
Thanks. So you've noticed we haven't been talking about grants or where you apply for the funding or that tactical stuff. I don't know how tactical we're really going to get, but I just wanted to note that we've been talking about the enabling resources, infrastructure, relationships, and connected pathways. Those are really kind of the critical foundation, because just a resource without the support, the connections, the networks, the mentoring is insufficient to really advance things. And I think in the healthy ecosystems, what you see is you can't step anywhere without stepping forward and bumping into the next resource or the next person who's going to assist you. One of the things that's shifted, I think, dramatically over the past at least decade, and Wade, I want you to start to take us into the funding picture, is how regional and state resources are beginning to actually be much more directed towards innovation, and kind of the view that this is a federal thing because it's about science is really shifting and changing.
Yeah, it sure is. When you said it's a good time to be an inventor, you couldn't be more right. So I'll tell you what the state of North Carolina has done recently. A few years ago, we had a group of business leaders, senior business leaders from across the state, and they looked at the state of North Carolina holistically, not just the R1s, but the R2s, R3s, HPCs, MSIs, and they wanted to get better as a state in commercializing research. So this group of individuals went out and they raised $25 million. Then they went to the General Assembly and they asked for $1.5 billion in funding to basically fund them to support the university system statewide. They got $500 million. They didn't get everything they asked for, but the legislature did approve $500 million. There's a new nonprofit in North Carolina called NC Innovation, and basically they are tasked with helping the rest of the UNC system kind of catch up to the universities in the Triangle. And they just did their first phase of pilot grants, but I talked about our Doherty Endowment was our first and only tool. We had $50,000 total across the whole university. Then we got the Chancellor's Innovation Fund. Ooh, now we have awards of $75K. That was a big step, big improvement. Now, with NC Innovation, they just awarded 8 projects $5 million. And that was their very first series of grants that they're going to do. So we're very excited that we're eligible to play in that space. And this money doesn't go to support the institutions. It actually goes to the researchers who have projects that are about a year, maybe 18 months from an inflection point, some sort of proof of concept or data point that's needed to either attract an industry member or decide to launch a new venture. And so we're very excited about that, and that just got launched here recently. But that's kind of the biggest and latest one that I'm aware of here in North Carolina. We also have other funding mechanisms. We have foundations. I could tell you, I gave you all the dirty laundry of NC State from years ago, but let me tell you about another conversation I heard, and this was recently. I was walking down the stairs in our building, and we were coming out of an I-Corps session. 2 engineering professors this time, their blood wasn't boiling. They were talking to each other about their own startups and the progress they had made. They both had startups, and they were just so excited about how the startups were doing. And I was walking behind them, and I was hearing them just clamoring about how excited they were about their startups. So we really have changed the culture. But there's business competitions, we have foundations, and then I have never seen NSF as excited as they have been recently when they created the new directorate, first directorate in 40 years, the Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate, the TIP Directorate. And they've got the Engines program, I-Corps, SBIR, STTR. They just launched the ART program, which basically went to 36 universities. There's 18 mentor universities and 18 mentee. And it's a good match for both Clemson and NC State because we can help educate them about our failure paths because we had plenty of them over the last decade. Like you mentioned, the Chancellor's Innovation Fund, Proof of Concept Fund. I could tell you one thing we did wrong on that right away at the beginning was they decided, wouldn't it be great if we could have our faculty judge the other faculty from our own university? Train wreck. Train wreck. Believe me, that did not go over well.
Yeah. So how you do this is really important, not just that you have the resource. And I think the way that we're thinking about the use of resources, and just to sort of emphasize this, it really is about the human processes that go along with this as much as it's about the resources that are made available. I want to, Steve, have you talk a little bit more about, and Wade, you brought up some of these resources, but Steve, how do these kinds of like proof of concept funds, how do they relate to the business of the tech transfer office? I mean, are they their own thing? Are they integrated with the work? What's the healthy practice?
Yeah, so great question. And to answer this, it helps to just sort of frame. So technology transfer, really, if you peel back a lot of the layers of the onion, it's really about risk mitigation, right? So you have very early stage innovations developed on your campuses, and the goal is to protect that invention and to license that out to a company, perhaps a startup company, that will turn that into the product or service of tomorrow. The problem is they're risky, right? There's a lot of risk inherent in the whole process. So what you want to do along the way is you want to minimize that risk. You want to increase your score on your TRL, your technology readiness level, as you move forward. I was fortunate years ago to be working at Wake Forest, where they had funds specifically designed to help advance an invention a little farther down that TRL scale. So that was great, but Wake Forest was one of the few that did this. And again, this is probably 15 years ago. It's now changed. Now what we're seeing, back to funding, is now we're seeing not only is that happening on more and more campuses, so probably many, if not all of your campuses now have proof of concept funds, and now you're hearing about state support for that risk mitigation, that de-risking process of those inventions. But now we're actually seeing this at the federal level, right? And that has never happened before. And the amount of programs and the amount of money that's available for this is really remarkable. So you guys know about chips and science, right? So of course, initially it was semiconductors, all that. That's the chips part. The science part is just as important. And frankly, for us, it's even more important. There are elements of that science aspect of the chips and science that are revolutionizing how we are developing innovations. So Wade did a great job, you know, the creation of a brand new directorate at NSF. Would you have ever expected that? That's focused on innovation and linking with those partners to advance those innovations. That's one example. And so with that formation, you've got these NSF Engines Awards. You guys have seen those. So there's Type 1, there's Type 2 that have benefited virtually every state in the nation. So that's one example. Another example of an NSF award is the ART program. That's the Accelerated Research Translation, which is another great way to help mentor institutions to advance tech transfer forward. But it's not just NSF that's doing this. So you have NIH with their REACH hubs. So this is, again, innovation happens everywhere, only advanced where commercial or where resourced. So that's what the REACH hubs are doing. They're actually creating these regional ecosystems to help advance innovation. So REACH is a great example. EDA is doing this with the EDA tech hubs. That's another great example. So you see time after time, and we're not even talking about SBIRs, STTRs, which, as you know, support startup companies. There is all this funding because the federal government, the state government, the university recognizes the value of innovation at a level that it, you know, again, you had a parking director in the basement of a tech transfer office that was newly created, and now you have billions of dollars that are being devoted to supporting you and your innovations. Again, it's a remarkable time to be an inventor.
Yeah. So I want to dive in a little bit, actually, with both you, Marc, and Wade, on one of these constructs, which I think illustrates the way that this is changing going forward, and some of the ways that the federal government is appreciating the need for the development of more local capacity and to actually address the fact that the innovation, the depth of innovation, resources, capacity, and focus really varies depending on where you are. So they've created some regional programs. The Engines program is, I think, a good example of this. Both of you are in states that have been successful with this program and both involved with it. So Marc, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the program and where it's going for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. And I'll let Wade's had a little bit more success, I think, in North Carolina than we have so far. But today is actually the deadline for LOIs for Type 2 engines to be submitted. So ours went in yesterday. I'm really excited about that. So I'll take off my University of Tennessee hat on and put on my engines hat, because I'm also CEO and PI on one of our engines that we submitted for yesterday. So really excited about that. I think that's, when you talk about the TIP directorate, it's so important to think about, you know, the evolution of NSF, thinking about and really inspiring all of us to work in this concept of innovation and entrepreneurship into all of their programming. That's important. You know, I think when the TIP directorate was developed a couple of years ago, and you begin to see all of the new funding opportunities come out, a lot of the things that you see are very different than what we're used to, right? You begin to think about impact on economic, you know, kind of the economies of the future. You think about startups, and it's not just the work that's being done in the lab, but how you translate that work out of the lab and create, you know, economic prosperity. So that's really what's, I think, so fascinating, so exciting about the times that we're living in right now. NSF has really grasped onto this, and you mentioned the EDA Tech Hubs. It all started with Build Back Better, you know, four years ago. All of these things are really spawning these technology hubs. And when you think about the translation of practice, you think about the creation of jobs, you think about how research is coming out of the labs to develop these regional engines, if you will. It's really exciting to think about that. And I know one of the ways, and I'm going to give Wade in the state of North Carolina some kudos here, because you know, those investors that went in and said, hey, this is what we want to do, the state of North Carolina has 2 Type 2 engines that have been awarded just in the past 6 months. That is because of that. I mean, if you want to look at that type of investment, it's because the state said, look, we've got private investors that are going to put money into this, and then we're going to match that, and we're going to go in at $500 million, and we're going to create an endowment and a fund that will pay out of that. That's why the state of North Carolina, that innovation, that's why they're successful in that.
Well, and in the Type 2 engine that you've got for textiles, I think one of the things that's really cool about that is that it's sort of a back to the future sort of approach. It's not saying, you know, you can only advance through innovation on quantum computing, and if you're not involved with that cutting edge technology, there's really no place in this. Instead, it's looking at what are the technology strengths and the core of that, and how does that drive into the future? Tell us a little bit more about that Type 2 engine.
Well, I'm not an expert on the engines in North Carolina, but North Carolina has one of the only College of Textiles left in the country. And part of the College of Textiles is the Nonwovens Institute, which is considered to be a world leader. And they're looking at new types of filters, new kinds of materials, fabrics made with nonwovens and advanced materials.
Yeah, so it's bringing kind of the emergent technology into a space where there's existing manufacturing capacity and the ability to rapidly kind of scale those impacts into both economic opportunity, but also ways that the technology can be used for new applications, which is really cool.
Yeah, nonwovens has been really prolific. I think they have 80 industry partners on Centennial campus that are members of the Nonwovens Institute. They have specialized equipment. They can do testing agreements, master research agreements, and yeah, it's really exciting. And you mentioned quantum. So in our art award with Clemson, I'm already finding out that Clemson has some good quantum assets in South Carolina. It turns out we do too in NC State. So I'm already envisioning the future engine, or future project maybe, of quantum computing in the Carolinas between North and South. And during the art kickoff meeting in DC about a month ago, the new directorate, he said, you know, the relationships that you have under the art award, your mentee-mentor relationship is very important. And NSF is looking at fueling you with more money in the future. So what are the ideas? And quantum's on our list.
Yeah, that's exciting. So, Sylvia, to scale these things, I think it's important to not just focus on public funding resources and regional connections, but actually think about private sector, which may be regional and hopefully, is close to the institution, but isn't necessarily only, people based geographically near where you are. You all have alumni networks, for example, with successful innovators and entrepreneurs and investors. If you could talk to us a little bit about how private sector funding is leveraged in this kind of invention continuum and how that really has created some paths forward at USF.
Definitely. So when we talk about those investments, you have to look at, of course, your non-traditional funding that may not, in fact, come from the state, but your VC funding, right? Your seed funds that are businessmen that are coming together and aligning themselves around one strategic investment. So how do you connect to that as an innovator, as a university, is to align with that return on investment. So when we look at those global challenges are being experienced in industry as well as across academia and in our communities. So as we come together across those spaces, then there's funding, again, across VC funding, across, even crowdfunding, even philanthropic funding. And we've heard some of those resources mentioned here during this conference. But aligning with the return on the investment across industry is key, and across those VC funders is key in looking at the needs of the community and how those innovations are going to address those needs will really make a difference in where the funding is going to be invested and how you're going to rise together in terms of the return that comes not only to the university, but goes to that venture capital fund, that goes to that community organization, that goes to that industry. So all of that is another avenue in terms of funding.
Right. So here we are in this moment. I hope we've convinced you that there's an incredible opportunity here, an abundance that I think we want to make sure that we and our colleagues take advantage of. And I want to close with thinking about how we make this continue into the future. And so I want to ask each of you, to talk about what this community, the NAI community, the Inventor community, the people who are passionate about invention and innovation, what should they be advocating for? Just, brief thought, 1 minute. What's the most important thing they should be advocating for? And Sylvia, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. So intentional, proactive engagement. As they say in the class, I want each of you to look to your left and look to your right. As you look to your left and look to your right, you will notice, as was mentioned yesterday, the lack of diversity that's part of our community in terms of women, in terms of underrepresented minorities. So I challenge myself to invite, sponsor someone who can, as I think it was Brad or Bradley yesterday, can contribute to our intellectual asset as a country, which is going to be extremely important as we continue to heighten our competitiveness. So that is my challenge to myself and to each of you, to be intentional in terms of your proactive collaborations as you engage your communities. We're trying to do that with the USF Evolve program across veterans, women, reaching back across our Florida Inventors Hall of Fame Ignite program, K through 12, encouraging them to be creative and to have an entrepreneurial mindset. So again, be intentional.
Marc, your thoughts.
So I think Sylvia mentioned, inclusive innovation, I think is key. But I'm going to turn it a little bit too and say, if you could advocate for incentivization of your innovation, right? So when we think about the tenure track process, ensuring that at our institutions that we're rewarding our inventors the way that they need to be rewarded, right? And provide them the time, the resources for their efforts. I think that's really key. So coming from me, I would say to fight for that and advocate for more incentives in the tenure track process.
Wade.
Well, I've given you bad news. I'll give you some more good news. We had a visit last Thanksgiving from the chairman of the board from the Council for Entrepreneurial Development. His name is Bill Spruill. He had a company that he sold for $300 million a couple of years ago. And Bill is a very philanthropic guy. And what he decided to do with his money was to invest it back into the system. So what he did is he formed a family foundation here in Raleigh, and he called me to a meeting right before Thanksgiving, and by the end of the meeting he said, I'm going to give you guys a philanthropic gift of close to $1 million to support your Chancellor's Innovation Fund because we have educational programs at CED that we'd like NC State folks to go through. And I was like, Bill, no one's ever given me anything like this before. You know, this is kind of unexpected. But his goal with his family foundation, and he gave $4 million to CED, $1 million to NC State. Well, the cool part about it is he's not an alumni. He's a Tar Heel. He's a graduate from UNC, but he decided that the deep tech is where he wanted to invest in, and that was at NC State. So he came and gave money to NC State. But he has a vision, and the vision is, his vision is he would like to return the Research Triangle to its technological dominance by 2033. And he's charged the Council for Entrepreneurial Development Board with creating 10 new billion-dollar companies in the next 10 years in the region. So he's a very ambitious guy. But what he would advocate for, and what he does, is we need business leaders that are experienced to do it again. So repeat serial entrepreneurs, I think, is what we need to advocate for.
Steve.
Yeah, so Autumn does a fair amount of work at the federal level, advocating for the profession and advocating for you. And so I guess the advocacy advice I would give is so there's the mantra on Capitol Hill, they can't help you if they don't know what you do. And so I would encourage each of you to reach out to your congressional representatives and bring them onto your campus. Show them what you're doing. Meet with your startup company. When you're in DC, meet with them. Now you might think, oh, nobody ever wants to talk to me. They love talking to you because you are the epitome of the investments that they're making. And once they recognize, hey, the investments that we make in research or in technology transfer or in other types of funding have payoffs, that will incentivize them to drive that forward. So I really encourage you to do that. If you haven't done that, please do it. You will be amazed at how open they are and receptive they are. And once they understand what you do, it's better. It makes it easier for them to support you because they understand where you're coming from. So I really encourage you to do that. That's a big driver. And why is that important for you? I'll give another example back to Chips and Science. In Chips and Science, there's a section of Chips and Science that Autumn actually helped draft called Section 10391. It allows for up to $1 million a year for 3 years to support tech transfer activities on your campus. That could mean patent applications, that could mean training of inventors or training of faculty, that could mean entrepreneurs, that can mean all sorts of stuff. Problem is, that is now, in congressional speak, authorized, meaning they can spend money on it, but they have no money to spend on it. That's the appropriated side. So by you showing them what you do and to say, with additional funding, we could do so much more, will really hit home. So that's what I would advocate for you, and you will be amazed. We do this with our board each year, and we head off to head off to their congressional representatives, and they often say, they don't really want to talk to me, I'm a little nervous. They come out of there jazzed, more jazzed than I've ever seen them. So please do it, you'll love it, and it'll have a significant impact.
Thanks, Steve. So just to wrap up here, I think what we have collectively argued for in terms of your advocacy is to tell your stories, to make your case, to participate and actively engage. One of NAI's pillars is advocacy. So you've got a entity and an organization here to do that. There are many things, and I hope we've given you some ideas of things to advocate for. Steve would probably welcome you on his Hill Day if you want to join them for that. And I would encourage you to actively take an opportunity to ensure that we do our part to drive this forward. There's a great focus on invention and innovation as things that are going to enable our national competitiveness, maintain our security, but those will only happen if we advocate not just for the idea of it, but actually for the resources to make it happen. So I encourage you to participate in that and to tell your story. Thank you to the panel for really stimulating remarks and hopefully leaving you as excited and optimistic as we are. Thank you. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Yeah. We have some time for questions if there's anybody in the audience who has a thought or question you want to share. There's a microphone right up here in front.
Good morning, panelists. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I've learned quite a few things. My name is Craig Gensch. I'm a faculty member here at NC State University, and I'm a plant scientist. I'm a plant breeder also, and I think many plant breeders are naturally inventors just by what we do. We create plants that feed the world, plants that beautify our world, feed, provide fiber, et cetera. And I dare say that especially for maybe some of the land-grant universities, they are your largest year-to-year revenue generators in terms of royalty funds. So my question for you would be, especially my colleagues in the land grants, is what can we plant breeders do to become more actively engaged in NAI? I mean, I've got this long list of tags on me. Tonight I'll be inducted. But I'm a little bit disappointed, actually, in the last 2 days that I've heard very, very little mentioned about plant science or plant breeding. I've heard a lot about startup companies, but there's a lot of things that folks do that just generate new innovation that aren't associated with the startups, but that have great value. So I'd welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Specifically, maybe focus a little bit on what's the role for plant breeders in NAI, and how can we help share the message?
That resonates deeply with me, and I've actually been having conversations with folks from land-grant institutions and also with the Extension Foundation about how to bring this kind of, what I would call the 21st century extension institution. And comments from folks here, because I know your institutions actually are actively involved in their extension programs. How do we make that happen?
Yeah, so I really appreciate the question. In fact, it resonates with me as well. My grandfather graduated from NC State in plant sciences, so I appreciate that. And I actually have written down on my notes, and I didn't mention it, but agriculture is a big part of entrepreneurship on our campus, especially as a land grant. So yes, the Extension Office, I think, is something, as we, I think, begin to revolutionize, re-revolutionize, is that a way of putting it? Our extension offices at our institutions. We have to make sure that we're looking at, in Tennessee, we have 95 counties. And just like NC State, I'm sure you've got an extension agent or an extension office in all 95 or all of the counties across the state. We have to make sure that we are providing the resources and the training to all of our extension agents to ensure that they are talking about innovation in a different way. I can't stress that enough. Stephen talked a little bit earlier about the revolution of tech transfer offices over the last 40 years. agriculture and extension offices have also really revolutionized over the last, I would say, 20 years, maybe not 40, maybe even 15 to 20 years. It's a way that we've got to train our extension agents to talk differently in their communities when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation. And I appreciate you mentioning extension offices. We should have talked a little bit about that. I will say this too. So Stephen, 40 years. So the University of Tennessee actually has the oldest tech transfer office in the entire Southeast, and it started around agriculture. And I think if you polled all of our technology transfer offices that are 40+ years old, that's exactly where it would have started in agriculture. So seed production, new plant sciences, those things are really, really important.
Working with farmers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who themselves are entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So we're at time, but we'll take a quick question, and then we'll wrap.
Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay. Not a question, but just a comment. I mean, number one, I want to thank you all that you've given a great perspective on how you are helping the inventors at your place. But I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective from the inventor side. All of these people here listening to you, they are inventors. And it happened back in the early part of this century. I had inventions. I was at the University of Florida, and the technology transfer office was setting up meetings with companies, and I would come back home and tell my wife, I think I wasted my time. They don't understand the invention I'm talking about. And she said, look, you are the one who understands it the best. So rather than talking to them, you start your own company. And that's when you will bring it to the people that you want to bring it to. We started a company called Molecule, which in 2016 started with 0 sales, and in 2020 had $100 million of sales.
Wow. Congratulations.
So my message is to all the inventors that you understand the value of your invention and how it's going to help people. And so the first thing you do is think about how you can bring it to the market.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Goswami.
Great. So I think that exemplifies the way that we're looking at these resources as being a way to put the inventor in control of the future and the impact of their invention. So great example of that taking place. And the success of it, I think, is something that should be inspiring to us all. Thank you.
Please help me in thanking Phil Weilerstein and his entire panel on funding.